racism on recording. But this one is quite interesting. I'm going to go to it and bring you the update. Here it is.
And this video is of a Lynchburg firefighter saying this. After I posted that video, many of you reached out to me and sent me a copy of this lawsuit of a former firefighter who accuses the city of Lynchburg and the fire department of wrongful termination based on race and discrimination. In the lawsuit, that individual talks about a video that he presented to the chief deputy of the fire department. In the video, a firefighter is going on a racist rant with a woman he's allegedly with, dating, or married. I'm not quite sure. Well, that person is a captain in the fire department.
Well, now, this was a video courtesy of our dear brother, Robbie Harvey. And now you are about to hear the alleged recording. Here it is.
And here is the alleged voice of that captain. Take a listen.
Are you talking to that? What?
Don't push me in my sock.
What are you talking to
Let
that?
me get my phone and call my family, because you're obviously out of your mind.
What are you talking to right now?
What?
What are you talking to now?
Why are you spitting in my face? Get out of my
You
face.
fucking nigger-loving fucking bitch.
Now, this video was allegedly presented to fire department officials back in 2017. And according to the lawsuit, nothing was done. The only thing that was talked about was a possible apology from Captain Scott Hargis to the individual who filed this lawsuit. But apparently that apology did not go well. Now, here's the interesting part. Nothing was done allegedly to the captain. Matter of fact, he was promoted since officials were made aware of that video.
According to the allegation, he was saying, what N-word are you seeing now? Okay. Here are the following allegations according to the lawsuit. So Brian Younger, Mr. Younger, a former firefighter for the city of Lynchburg, alleges that the city discriminated and retaliated against him on the basis of race. Younger alleges. He says he experienced this racism several times. Race-based scrutiny and disparate treatment during his employment tenure. And he contends that he was ultimately fired as retaliation for attempting to address said issues. The alleged mistreatment began about 10 years ago, 10 years into his term, when he was shown a very disturbing video. According to the lawsuit, in or around 2017, Younger, quote, was given, end quote, a video in which his colleague, Scott Hargis, is shown screaming at Hargis' wife. Hargis accuses her of sleeping with black men. And he uses the N-word liberally. Now, based on the allegation, he was not demoted. He was not disciplined. He was not fired. And more. Younger was greatly disturbed by this video. He saw it as a clear misconduct and saw it as clear racism. Concerned about the video and racial climate in the workplace, he showed it to several of his black colleagues. He sought to gather a group of employees who would present the recording to management and make a complaint. But every employee he asked to stand with him feared retaliation and decline. Within a few weeks of the video surfacing, Younger was instructed to speak to then Deputy Chief Greg Wormser, and now current fire chief. So Greg told Younger that he was aware of the video. Younger expected the chief would seek to address the issue. And he expressed his feelings of hurt and betrayal that Hargis had made such harsh statements. But rather than the chief laying out a plan to confront Hargis, Younger himself became the subject of scrutiny. He was asked if he planned to harm Hargis. He said, no. It's so damn silly. You got to laugh, not to cry. The chief says, do you plan to harm the racist individual? So immediately, the victim, Mr. Younger, has to now defend himself from an accusation that he is somehow the perpetrator. He's a victim of racism who has a supervisor who is obviously racist. The supervisor didn't say, what man are you seeing or who are you seeing? What N-word are you seeing? He was encouraged to accept an apology from Hargis. Now that means basically, Chief, you're saying you know that it was him. There's no alleged in your mind, if this is true. So he encouraged him to accept an apology. To him, this implied that the problem would not be addressed further afterward. And although he was prepared to accept an apology from Hargis, he did not expect the apology to take the form of Hargis showing up at Younger's home at 9 o'clock in the morning with a 6-pack of beer. At his doorstep, Hargis asked Younger if he was recording the interaction. Younger was offended by the question and told Hargis that he was no longer interested in his apology. Younger generally avoided Hargis in the workplace after that, despite the tension. Both Hargis and Younger remained in good standing in their companies. The brother said he was willing to accept an apology, not a tap dance. He was willing to accept an apology. Don't patronize me like you're not racist. Don't act as if we're buddies. Don't try that with me. Show some respect for the common sense that I do have. It is clear who you are. It is clear what you are. You show up to the man's home with a 6-pack of beer with the question, are you recording me? Younger's 2018 performance evaluation stated that he, quote, truly underestimates himself and his abilities, and he was called on to investigate more fires than any other investigator who worked for the city throughout 2018. Hargis, for his part, was twice promoted since 2017, since that video surfaced, despite what Younger characterizes as Hargis's clear discriminatory animus for Black Americans. And what he's dealing with is a culture. See, the culture that supervises Hargis, while they may not have said the N-word, they probably said something to the effect of support for Mr. Hargis and the way he decided to accost his significant other. So there's this cultural connection that is not shared with Mr. Younger. So Mr. Younger, doing the dutiful thing, the thing that's on paper to do, the thing we're supposed to do as public servants, he does that thing. And all of a sudden, nothing happens but promotions. Several years later, as COVID-19 pandemic took hold, Younger alleges that he began to call out racism and microaggressions in the workplace where he saw them, which only led to further discrimination and retaliation against him. For instance, supervisory staff at the city began to scrutinize Younger's unit more than any other unit. In particular, Battalion Chief Kenny Turner on the left, quote, began to check up on everything Younger did despite not being Younger's supervisor. BC Turner went so far as to initiate disciplinary action against Younger for a contrived reason. When Younger experienced COVID symptoms and arranged for a colleague to cover his shift, In accordance with company policy, BC Turner escalated the situation by going to Battalion Chief Alan Carwile on the right to complain that Younger had, quote, no call and no showed, end quote. BC Carwile called Younger to ask for clarification. He responded that he was simply following COVID protocol and had asked a colleague to cover his shift. BC confided in him that Turner was, quote, on the warpath trying to get him, end quote. BC Turner had never attempted to contact Younger. Younger filed a formal complaint about BC Turner's behavior, quote, feeling that he was being targeted unreasonably for disciplinary action based upon his race and his prior reports of racial discrimination in the workplace. But the city's hasty investigation concluded, that Younger's claim was unfounded. There's more. Later, Younger was speaking with his colleague named Frankie Fowler, seen here receiving an award for Firefighter of the Year 2023 and Master Firefighter in 2024. When, quote, the subject of the workplace environment came up, Younger expressed that he had experienced racial discrimination and hostility at the fire department, to which Fowler responded with disbelief. When Younger provided names and specifics, Fowler only expressed further disbelief. When Younger asked why Fowler had such a hard time believing him, Fowler did not respond. Captain Quincy Scott on the left was present during that conversation. Although the conversation, quote, never got combative on either side, Younger soon found himself accused of ganging up on the young Fowler the next time Younger worked. The accusation charged that Younger and Captain Scott had cornered Fowler and attempted to force him to say the N-word, which Younger maintains never happened. Younger felt that this interaction, like the BC Turner interaction, quote, was clear retaliation for his discussion of racial discrimination in the workplace. Isn't it ironic that bigots are okay with being racist, just not being called one? There's more. January 2021. The aftermath of the attack on the U.S. Capitol, Younger shared a meme on his social media profile showing the January 6th rioters, domestic terrorists, attempting to climb the walls of the Capitol. The meme superimposed photos of butter crackers on the rioters. Younger was aware that several of his colleagues had traveled to Washington that day to participate in the attack. He was not aware that the reference to butter crackers could be seen as a slur. The meeting was called to discuss Younger's interaction, not the fact that anybody from the department went to the Capitol to commit terrorism. Based on Fowler's complaint, but during the conversation, the attorney showed Younger a copy of the social media post and informed him that some of his colleagues had found it offensive, despite Younger's colleagues on social media interacting positively with the post. Once again, the young brother is on the defensive and has to prove he's not the perpetrator. Put him up full mask. Okay, so several weeks after that, Younger received more disturbing video. So the wife of one of his colleagues, Brennan Lawson, contacted Younger directly and provided several video recordings of Lawson screaming the N-word at pedestrians while he drove past them in his car. Younger attempted to show the video to his supervisors, but they were uninterested in discussing it. They were only interested in his meme. Put him up, man. This brother been through a whole lot. So Younger tried to present the video during his remarks at City Hall. A City Hall meeting, freedom of speech is intact. You get to make presentation. You get to say what you want to say. It is your freedom. But city staff, the acting deputy city manager, Kent White, and then the then human resources coordinator, Nicole Campbell, not pictured, prohibited him from doing so. Let me take you to 2022, month of July. Younger arrived at work to find that Lawson, his colleague from the N-word screaming video, had left his personal items on Younger's bunk. He, quote, asked aloud who the items belonged to. Lawson, who was in the next bunk, stated that the items were his and that he would move them. Younger stated that he didn't want other people's personal items on his bunk and asked Lawson not to use his bunk as storage in the future. He then left the bunk room to retrieve more of his personal items from his vehicle. When Younger returned to the bunk room, Lawson's items were still on his bunk. So he began to move the items himself. In response, Lawson became defensive, saying, "I was going to get the stuff, dude." Younger said, quote, "Yes, but you didn't. So never touch any of my belongings again, Brennan." Lawson asked why he was making such a big deal out of it and stated that he didn't do anything to Younger's bed. Younger replied, quote, "I don't know what you might have done. Just don't ever touch my belongings." Lawson continued to argue, and Younger continued to ask him not to touch his belongings in the future. Eventually, Younger left the bunk room. When Younger later returned, he crossed paths with Lawson as Lawson was exiting. Lawson stopped and said, quote, "Don't ever get in my face again." Younger replied that he had not been in his face. Lawson repeated his demand at Younger not to, quote, get in his face and said, "What's your problem? We're supposed to be friends." Younger replied that they were not friends and referenced Lawson's use of racial slurs in the recording he had seen. At that point, as Lawson moved toward Younger and Younger continued calling Lawson racist, colleagues intervened. Lawson then went to report to Captain Scott while Younger spoke to Lombre, who calmed him down. Younger also went to Captain Scott separately. He complained to Scott and B.C. Carwile that the fire administration failed him by allowing racial inequities to occur and go unchecked for years. He stated that the fire department was, quote, just worried about optics and not working to correct the problem. Already seems like way too much. This guy has been dutiful. This individual received messages from family members about how racist his colleagues are. His colleagues are saying, no, we're supposed to be friends. Okay? You must be my friend. Even if there's racism here. Obviously, we're friends. On July 18th, 2022, an investigation was finally initiated and Younger was placed on administrative leave. Okay? So now he got an investigation. He's placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. Younger pleads that only he was placed on paid administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation into his mutual altercation with Lawson was the reason Younger was then terminated 2 years later, June 2024. The investigatory report authored by B.C. Carwile was provided to Younger 2 months later. The report stated that the investigation had concluded in August of 2022. It concluded in August of 2022. The report found Lawson's allegations were true. Younger pleads sufficient facts to support the claim that he was treated differently than similarly situated white employees. Indeed, he claims that the city terminated him under circumstances where similarly situated white employees were not even disciplined. For instance, he alleges that Hargis was promoted multiple times after being recorded using racial slurs, that Lawson was not disciplined after being recorded using racial slurs, and that B.C. Carwile, who authored the investigatory report, was not terminated even after being arrested for domestic violence. The city denied any allegation of retaliation and had sought to dismiss the lawsuit by request, but the request was denied. Damn. This brother has been going through this for many, many years, so I thought it was proper to make sure you had the full story. Dear brother, thoughts here?
Well, I'm going to be very, very real, Dr. Richey. There is a lot to unpack here. I'm pretty sure I've seen this on an episode of Chicago Fire. It was like a series arc. Let's go through the thing. First of all, not very surprised that there's racism in a city called Lynchburg, especially in Virginia. By the way, if you're not familiar, Lynchburg is right next to Blacksburg. There is no way that is a coincidence. I just want to remind you of Virginia's long history when it comes to racism. I myself, being from DC, right outside of DC as well, the Northern Virginia area, very different than the rest of Virginia. Beautiful, beautiful state, but there are lots of problems that still exist. Now, I will say this, I'm not gonna have a very popular opinion when it comes to a lot of these things, because while I personally did not like that Donald Sterling's sons all work at this fire department and have a problem with their wives bringing blacks to the games or whatever was going on, I do not think that personal videos from home should be brought into the workplace or be system for workplace punishment. That is not how that works. Those were at home, not trying to eradicate personal private beliefs. I'm not for that. That is at home. I do think that they should check their partners and see why this keeps happening between different ones. Now, I will say, however, that there's also nothing good about the good old boys. These good old boys and that system is obviously very corrupt, as we see, because what I do think it is indicative of is a system and a culture of racism that is obviously prevailing and persisting in this fire department. And that is why it is corroborative or pre-appraised evidence that can allow for Younger to say, hey, I am expressing to you that this is what happens. These are the people. This is why it's happening. At that point, things should get done. Stop trying to sweep Younger under the rug. This is where we get the idea, the notion of uppity. That's why it is a person who's standing up for their rights, their principles, and their beliefs. And because they're causing problems, because it's more comfortable to just let things be and just allow for the racism to persist and know your place and all these things, that person becomes uppity. And you see that in the way that they handled Younger. What did they do? They place him on administrative leave. They constantly badger him. They go after him. Let's not remove the problem. Let's remove the person who is bringing up the problem. That is wrong. And this is the problem. We own this company. It is a fire department. That is, we are their employees. We are the people paying them, the state taxpayers. So remember, this is an investigation. It is a show of corruption. And it is just a reminder that racism is very far, far away from being done with this race.
Yeah, and I will say this, and I generally agree with you about the stuff that happened external of the job being brought in. But even in a court of law, there's an exception. And if you can utilize information that shows a clear pattern, then that outside information or information not really related to the case but clearly shows a pattern is then acceptable. And I would say this about the firefighters in the situation at hand. If they simply would have dealt with this, because it seems as if Mr. Younger is a very reasonable human being who was willing to accept an apology, who was willing to accept, hey, I'm sorry, let's move on. That if they would have just dealt with some of this, you never would have had the big snowball you have today. It's unfortunate that it's here, especially given the fact that taxpayers are paying for this every day. And lastly, I'll say this, dear brother, if you're in a position of public trust where you got to make decisions to save people's lives, the fact that you think anybody is an N-word, the fact that you think any black person is subhuman to you, that will cause me some caution to say this person is worthy to be in such a position of public trust when it comes to saving lives. But I get your point, generally speaking. Okay,